We first met 30 years ago. 1992, Anxiety of Influence lands. The first Blue Dog Pict album, is that right?
It was the first album that we released on compact disc. We had one album before that we did during high school that came out called the Picture album. And there's an entire cult following around that cassette, which has never been released digitally. But the thing that matters about it was the one where the kids at Etobicoke School of the Arts and Michael Power, which are two high schools in Toronto, that's what they started with before Anxiety of Influence. And they would come to our shows in those early days, but it was the mixing of those two high schools at places like the Opera House that were instrumental to sort of dynamics that happened later on. So by the time we did Anxiety of Influence, which was only a year later, we had a little bit of a base, slightly fanatical base. The ones that didn't like us hated us, but the ones that did were like lifers. So Anxiety of Influence was a much larger effort. We recorded the Picture album in 2 days at Eastern Sound in Toronto, which was an incredible studio. They don't make them like that anymore. We went in with a carton of cigarettes. We were 15 years old and came out with an album 2 days later. And you can hear it on the record as my voice just progressively erodes. And then Anxiety of Influence was quite different. We went into Sounds Interchange, which was an enormous studio complex where people like Rush were recording and Smashing Pumpkins and, you know, the biggest orchestras, all sorts of projects. And I was making catwalk money at the time. And the reason I went there was I said, it can't be that we're just bad or that we're independent. Like if we match the record labels for production value, maybe people will give us the time of day. So it was like no expense spared. I just spent all the money I was making from TV on this album. And we brought in people like Catherine Rose and Jackie Richardson and Carlos Del Junco and all of these incredible session players that I had met on the streets or in the theater community, which is really where I was growing up. And that album was the one that you are referencing, The Anxiety of Influence. And it took about 1.5 years, which was a lot longer than the 3 days it took to make the first record, 2 or 3 days. And at the time, it seemed like this magnum opus, but little did I know what was going to come after it, which was a band that toured and played at, you know, CBGBs and headlined Saturday nights at every club in Toronto for a good 3 or 4 years. But at that time, we were nobody, and we were playing Stradingers in the Opera House, and lucky to get a gig.
You know, when I heard Blue Dog Pict for the first time and became one of those believers, it struck me that the band very much of its time, but also there was an artistic sensibility there that was bigger than alternative rock, which is how you would have been categorized back in that time. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like there's this missing thing about Blue Dog Pict that hasn't been told or seen or understood. And the other day I put out a tweet. For some reason, the 90s was trending on Twitter. And it was this, it said something like, why the 90s will be the last cultural movement or something like that. And I retweeted it and I said, there was no digital social media at the time. There was a lot of camcorders, but the most of this gender fluidity, postmodernism, marketing aversion, skepticism about the powers that be, all of those things really kind of just exist in our heads. And there's this vastly misunderstood or under-archived era of thought and erudition and counterculturalism that was really what Blue Dog Pict was made of. I mean, now I don't know how I would talk about these things given the important movement in the culture around gender identity. But then it manifested in my band intrinsically as a rebellion against gender norms and against all sort of norms, any sort of imposition on how we thought, dressed, felt, behaved, interacted was something that Blue Dog Pict was designed to challenge. And yes, it was partly performance art, but the performance art was not a gimmick or the thing. It was designed to be a provocation, a battle flag to say, don't ignore us. This is not just about music. This is about, this is literally a battle cry about stepping into assumptions about what we need to be in our lives and how we need to like play that out. Another dynamic of it was that I would go to these speakeasies all the time. I was too young to be going to speakeasies, but I was more from the theater world. So to me, it wasn't like I was in the club world. It was more like I was seeing my theater friends who mixed it up with the music world in Toronto. And I was picking up on that as well. So that was the performance, the literature, it just all boiled together. But we were not, people didn't know what to do with us. They didn't know how to line up a bill with Blue Dog Pict because it was a very amorphous sort of sponge. And it didn't necessarily play well with others. It was designed not to play well with others.
I mean, my impression was then, and we've seen this countless times since, but a lot of people tend to see those other aspects of a band or an artist as decorative. And that wasn't the case with Blue Dog Pict. It was more central to what you were doing. It was a larger artistic statement. Your vision was bigger than just a style of music. And when Constant Change, for example, put together a compilation album or presented a show or did an ambient show, something completely different, it was all part of a larger whole that was there and at least for me, very compelling.
I can't tell you how nice it is to hear you recognize that that was the case. There was a complex network of events and players that was designed for someone to pick up and to notice that that was going on. It was not random, laissez-faire, pick it up as it goes. Everything had a longer sort of arc or a wider arc. There was this sort of blueprint that we were coloring in as we moved forward. And we did do takeovers. Like at the time, you had shows at the Ultrasound, which was an incredible venue operated by Yvonne Matzel, where people like Jeff Buckley came and played for the first time in Toronto. And the Rheostatics, which is one of my favorite bands of all time, let alone Canadian bands, they would do like a weekend at the Ultrasound. And I noticed this, and I actually took that over and said, let's buy the entire like club listing for that weekend and make it thematic. And then we would make each night a different immersive context. So like one night was Nature Boy is a drag queen, or we had the systematic slaughter of the middle class, or Robot Pride Day. And these were all built out like with sets and lighting and costumes. And we would ask our closest followers, friends to show up dressed up in a particular way. And I think some of it came from things like the Grateful Dead, the whole idea of deadheads. Some of it came from Rocky Horror. But it was also just to like to like get away from the whole flannel and boots look of Canadian shows that was so prevalent. You know, everything was like, God bless all those bands. I'm not taking anything away from their musicality, but they all looked the same, these shows. And I wanted to put markers in memory that we could, I don't know why I knew this, and I don't know how much credit I can take, but I knew that what we needed to do was like make an incision in the brain and say, this is something that you need to remember or want to remember. This is a moment that we can build together. We don't need to wait for entertainment to be given to us from Mount Olympus.
Acting has always been a part of your life, as has more recently a lot of work in virtual reality and other tech-related spaces. What ties all of this together for you? Because music is just one part of Keram.
Cognition, the way that we think, is a construct. It's an artificial construct. I mean, it's artificial to the degree that our eye holes and ear holes and haptic sense holes and all of that kind of stuff is a construct. But, you know, what we see is an illusion. We see things on a 15-second delay. We see parts of the color spectrum that other animals don't or do, you know, see more than us. We hear things in a particular way. We have a vestibular system and a galvanic skin response and all of these things that conspire to create a form of a reality that we believe exists to allow our particular brand of animal to survive and thrive and live. You know, we see movement at high speed in a very particular way to our ability to outrun it, whereas a cat would a different way. If we don't understand the way that we are inside of this construct, then we are prone to be manipulated by those who do. I sound paranoid. I'm not. It's just that my obsession is with what is the nature of truth? What is the nature of reality? Is reality even a thing? Or is there is there no singularity? Is there no consensus reality? And if so, then what other opportunities are out there for us? And music, so even time is not a constant. Time is not even pervasive. Like time only exists around as far as we can understand at the highest level of thinking by those who have any right to talk about it. Time only exists in bubbles around gravitational bodies. And then it doesn't exist, period. It's just not there. And it moves at different speeds for different things at different times in different ways, let alone the ones that are participating in it at different degrees of closeness. So what is music? Music is our way, it's our reaction to that, to play with time, to meter it out, to find a pattern in it and measure entropy against that process. There's no time, there's entropy. There's that things decay and erode and change and break down. That is a immutable fact of the universe, that change is constant, if I may. But music is our lyrical reaction to finding a way to handle that problem. And to flow with the problem and to put up a friction against that problem that goes, oh, it exists, it's happening over time. That's what music is.
I said, I mentioned up top, it's been 30 years since we first met. It's been 26 years since I saw you last. And I guess this relates to technology in some respects. What is the nature of friendship? Why is it that we've been able to pick up here just exactly like it was a couple of months later? What does friendship mean to you?
Wow, what an incredible question. And I will think about it long after whatever I spout out right now. But I know exactly what you mean. It's interesting that I have had some friendships that lately I no longer want to pick up again. It's like they really satisfied their mission, and it's almost like I don't want to write another sentence. And yet other ones I can't live without. And then there's other kinds, which is like the one that you and I have, which is not that I can't live without you, and I'm not done with you either. And it's just that there's an extended observational conversation where we're together looking out, and there isn't that sort of ego in the way where that will impede our mutual interest in discovery. I feel safe with you. I feel like I can trust you, but I don't need everything else. It's that I know with some assurance that you will continue to spark new insights and ideas and challenges for me, and that I'm doing that with you in a way where the question is the thing. There's no ulterior motive. I guess that's the thing about friendship, is ultimately with friendship, there is no ulterior motive. You know, it could be good, it could be bad, it could be sideways. Some days it might get ugly with each other, but you're doing it for the sake of doing it. As James Carse would say in Finite and Infinite Games, a finite game has a victor and a loser. And there are a billion ways to be a strategist when that is the case. And the victor will be memorialized and immortalized, and the loser will be removed from further play. But an infinite game is like a marathon. It's a relay race where you pass the baton on to the next person to ensure that you can always continue the play. And there are a multitude of finite games, but there's but one infinite game.